This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. So calling session PENHC 01-2022 to order at 7:09 p.m. Emergency exits. Everybody knows how to get out of their own houses. So we'll leave that with that. For committee members, I should say, I did mention Diane is not able to attend. She's given us notice of that, so she will not be attending. Members' declarations of pecuniary interest, if you have any now or at any other time during the meeting, please declare them. Item 4 on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have someone to move that, please?
I will so move.
Jerry, and seconded by Barbara, and all in favor. And the agenda, thank you. The agenda is approved. Item 5, approval of minutes of our planning session 04 of 2021. Does anybody have any comments, questions, corrections or whatever to the draft minutes of our last meeting, 04 of 2021?
I will move they're adopted as read.
Moved by Jerry, seconded by John. And if there are no objections, then we mark that as approved. This is a public meeting open to the public, so our item number 6, public question period. If there is anybody on computer or online or on their phone, are there any questions from the public? And seeing none, we'll move on to I should try to I don't know why I'm out of focus here, but it's supposed to be autofocus. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. Moving on to item number 7 of our meeting, which is the real point of tonight's meeting, which is for our discussion for large houses on rural lots. We have 2 planning reports on this, one dated July 20th of 2021 and the other December 14th of 2021. I'm just there. Okay, so we have those 2 reports from our Director of Planning. David, these are detailed reports. I'm going to assume that the members have read through them. So I don't want to take a lot of time with going through the details of this. I guess to introduce the subject here is that the council has determined that the issue of large houses on rural lots is something that Town of Mono Council should investigate and put into an official plan amendment and zoning plan amendment. And they have asked that the planning committee weigh in on this before they discuss this further. And they will, as required, be having a statutory public meeting on this before they pass any changes to the official plan or to the zoning bylaw. David, that's a brief introduction to it. Again, without going through the detailed work that you've done here, what can you add to that to help us before the members start our discussion about this issue?
Thank you, Chair McRae. It arose from one, if not two, houses that were built in the rural area. I'm not sure it's a pervasive issue in the rural area, but one or two builds triggered some attention by council. And so they've asked me to look into whether or not we can apply some policy provisions in the official plan and the zoning bylaw perhaps as well. So the two amendments are first draft. That's what they represent. They're likely to change. And what they've attempted to do with the, with some of the research we've been able to do, let me stop there for a minute. Part of this issue, more broadly in Southern Ontario, is more of an urban issue and has been in the past several years, if not decade. But it seems to have evolved towards rural areas as well. But that said, this draft, these two drafts try to provide a modest measure of guidance. Well, that's what the policies for the official plan would do. The zoning amendment is a prescription, right? They'd have to be followed. It's not rocket science, but it's tricky because if we go too far, we end up with a multitude or potentially a multitude of minor variance applications. And that has implications, resource-wise, time-wise, and to homeowners. I think the key elements that we can look at are, height, lot coverage, setbacks, of course, something called FAR, floor area ratio, maybe. Parking, we don't need to, it's in the rural area, so that's really not an issue. Landscaping, those are the key ones that we might want to weigh in on and have some dialogue about. And I think the other thing that I'm looking from guidance from committee for is, before we weigh into the minutia that we may have to on certain of these aspects of policy and or zoning prescription, is what, I think we just need an open discussion about, what is really the nature of the problem, where they seem to arise, and how collectively does committee feel there may be a way to help manage it. I think at the end of the day, I could be wrong. We may have just an official plan amendment to provide some policy direction instead of both policy and zoning, but who knows? That remains to be seen. So the amendments are not comprehensive. They're modest. They're deliberately modest amendments. And I think part of the tests we'll have to look at, though, is house size relative to setback. I'm not so sure about lot coverage. It depends on the size of the lot, but there could be a scale that could be applied. But I think setback's one of the key ones, because I think part of the concern is really adverse influence of rural. I can't use streetscape, but that's the best word I can come up with. Rural roadscape, if not streetscape. I think that's been part of the reaction that's caused inquiry and concern. So I'm in your hands. It needs a bit of a dialogue, and I would not be surprised one bit if this good committee said at the end of this meeting, we're not ready yet to make a recommendation. We need to kick this can again a second time round. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. So with that, I think it needs an open dialogue about what are perceived to be the collective expectations of the Mono, particularly rural citizenry.
No, very good, Dave. Yeah. And just in case any one of the Mono residents does look at the tape on this, to be clear about this, no municipality, not Mono or anybody else, can stop these developments. They're this kind of development. We cannot stop it, but we can regulate it and control it. And that's, David, that's really what you're talking about. And I think that's what the Mono Council is wanting here. So with that in mind, let's start that dialogue. Barbara, let's start with yourself, please. Your thoughts about what, the two reports that we've got, and your thoughts about this as an issue, major or minor or whatever, please.
Well, looking at the report, the only thing I question is it's pretty, property design is pretty subjective. I mean, what I find attractive or obtuse may not appeal to someone else's sense of judgment, but I can see where they're coming from, but I still don't understand how in God's name you're going to be able to regulate this, because you can probably make suggestions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Ontario government has put out a new housing structure. I read that today. I've been reading all over the place trying to find some sort of guidance on this. I think 11 meters height is the only suggestion I think that's practical, but I really don't see how you can regulate a building, because other than the setbacks and the height. I mean, I could, number of square feet, I could build something that looks like a World War II storage bunker, which would probably fall under the correct qualifications, but it would be, I would venture to say that 3/4 of Mono ratepayers would find it very unattractive and not like it. So I think it's primarily subjective to taste. Anybody else on that? I can't see how you can, other than putting forth guidelines on the frontage and the height. And
Dave,
yeah, the only other thing,
David? Sorry, Barbara, I'm talking over you.
that's okay.
Barb, you made some very poignant points here. But here's one for you, just to make it more complicated. I come into Mono, I buy some land, maybe not a small parcel, maybe 40, 50 acres, maybe 20 acres. And I have a world-class architect design me a house with some reference to bucolic and rural element. And they come up with a design in the shape of a silo that's maybe beyond height. Now, there will be some people who will challenge me that this is an eyesore. It's 3 stories high, maybe more. And yes, it looks like a silo and reflects to an agricultural element that is has gone out of need. I won't say favor, but need, I think. But here's a celebration of a traditional agricultural structure. And the other side of the fence, there are the people who may support that, and there'll be a whole bunch of others who say this thing is way over appropriate height for a rural area because it's not 1 or 2 levels. So that's a wrinkle for you. I say that deliberately because there's an example where, although it may be well designed, it's got some imposing height to it. And then on the other side is a 1-story prairie-style bungalow that Frank Lloyd Wright would literally, praise to the end of the world, but it's 15,000 square feet. You're right, it's very subjective. And so I think per my initial comments, it will remain to be seen whether we can apply some feasible zoning prescription. But I think a good place to start is some policy guidance. And your 2 comments are well taken. But I just leave you with those 2 examples of how indeed, in fact, some folks could say we praise this piece of beautiful architecture that is beholden to an agricultural element from the past versus one that's a prairie style, but also 15,000 plus square feet and is large in lot coverage relative to most other houses.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Barbara, was there anything else? There may be after you hear some of the other comments.
I'm fine for now. I agree 100% with what David just said, because again, design is subjective, and Antonio Gaudi's superstructure versus a Welsh castle, in theory, could be built in a 40-acre lot. So you can't define the taste, so to speak.
Very good. I'm going to go alphabetical order here then. So Jerry, you're the next in the alphabetical order. Your comments, please. Your thoughts.
Yeah. I thought David made a really, really good report, or two reports, I guess, as it turned out. I don't know whether how you can actually put that in a building code or whatever, but I'm kind of concerned about multi-family dwellings on that kind of a thing. David mentioned about parking, and you know, there's one not very far from me on Five Side Road that nobody has lived in for 4 years, and nobody has ever lived in, in fact, that I know of. But it's built that you could probably put 3 or 4 families in there. And if that be the case, there might be a parking problem with cars and stuff all the time, and certainly road access and whatever. I guess the other thing, and again, it's subjective, but so I don't know how we regulate it or whatever. But you know, we talk about all the time about climate change and stuff, and I'm not a real dug in on that. I guess at this point, probably not as much as I should be, because we're trying to mitigate it all the time. But really, for a single dwelling house, I wonder about its carbon footprint and how far we go with that. But I don't know how David would know better than I, how you could regulate that through a official plan or whatever. That's my only comments. I look at what's going up. I guess I was going to say south of us, but all the way around us, and even subdivisions. And I had occasion today to go up Veterans Way, and the show home that's up there, that they've just put up on the Gillespie place. Families are getting smaller, not bigger, and I don't know whether they're afraid to chase each other around the houses or just what. But a decent sized bungalow would make more sense to me, I would think, than some of the ones that they're building. But that again is just my opinion, sort of thing. So I think that's all I have, Bob.
Very good. Thank you, Jerry. John, please.
I enjoyed reading these reports and stewing on this a little bit, but I was on the Niagara Escarpment Commission for, I don't know, a dozen years, and the Niagara Escarpment Commission, I think, you know, covers what, 40–50% of Mono. And so in the first report from July, on page 6, I would have hoped that you might have been able to add a column there that lays out what goes on in the Niagara Escarpment Commission area, in the Niagara Escarpment planning area, because so many people in Mono would be affected by that, and yet they'd be looking at their neighbors who are outside of it and seeing different practices. And anyway, the lessons that my memory is not great on this, but the Niagara Escarpment faced this issue decades ago with a whole series of proposals for 40, 50, 60,000, 70,000 foot monster homes, true Tuscany castles, and they worked their way through this. And I'll try and summarize what my recollection is of their process, because rather than coming up with something prescriptive, which as Barbara and Jerry have mentioned is so difficult, they have, I believe, the option of suggesting to somebody that, oh, that's a pretty big building. We'd like you to do what they call a visual impact assessment, so that at least there's something other than straight, site plans and straight architectural drawings that would cast would lead the viewer in the eye to see what it might look like. So, for example, if someone's building a home that's a kilometer away from a road and can't even be seen, well, it's of less interest to people in terms of its aesthetics. And there's, well, as Barbara and Jerry have mentioned, there's all sorts of those variables. So, but what they did with that is, so for that subset of applicants who were asked to do a visual impact assessment, that then led to, I don't think it was a legal requirement, but a strong suggestion that the applicant then have stage meetings with neighbors, or a meeting with neighbors, to look at it and talk about it and get through that. And if that didn't sort things out, then when it got to the commission, there was a discussion of the possibility, not the requirement, but for the possibility of site plan controls to try and, put into effect what had come out of the visual impact assessment and out of the site, out of the meeting. So that I can imagine what's running through your mind, which is, well, that's a pretty laborious way of dealing with this, but it has been effective in mitigating a number of really quite volatile situations where there were, people who were, if not billionaires, close to it, who had all the best lawyers at their disposal to push their way through. They ended up with things, buildings which were much larger than my own taste, but they fit better and they were acceptable to their neighborhoods as a result. So Dave, I might just suggest that that a call to the planners at the Niagara Escarpment Commission might present you with a clearer summary of just how they approach it than I've been able to give. But the issue that I see it with the second report that I read closely is that, I think page 4, you list 3 different possible approaches at the top, 1, 2, 3. And so I go through it and I just say to myself, well, and list the kind of things that you've mentioned. So you raise the issue of site plan controls, but then you build in no requests or opportunities to suggest such a thing, and perhaps that's understandable. You mention visual impact assessments in your reports, but in your conclusions, you don't suggest any possibility of staff being able to ask for or require a visual impact assessment. You talk about reduced lot coverage, but then you make no recommendation about a change to reduce the lot coverage. And you also mention the use of maximum building area, but then you recommend no no change to the current maximum building area. So the one thing that I can read that is pertinent, I think, most pertinent to this is that you're recommending a reduction in the maximum height from 12.2 meters to 11 meters. Now, the one what I would call monster home, colloquially, south of the valley, not too far north of Jerry's, that I think about in my mind's eye, if it was 4 feet lower, it would still be a monster home because they just dig out the basement 4 more feet or something. I mean, it is so immense that I'm not sure the change in 4 feet in maximum height really, I mean, it just amends the architectural calculations, but I don't think it really deals with what I think council and the mayor have raised, which is the matter of, you know, suddenly there's an eruption in the rural landscape of a building that's quite too large for its neighborhood. And I do appreciate, David, the care that you put at recommending some changes in goals and sort of higher level, more general thoughts that can be brought to the matter when it comes to your desk. But I read those, which I just in particular, I think they're on your second report on page 9 of 12. There's a change to the general goals of the plan and to the development policies, a new paragraph. But I don't think they give you the tools to do too much different than what you currently have available. I may be mistaken in this. So I'd encourage you, I guess, yeah, well, first off, in your report to council, I mean, I think it would be great if there was a tighter and shorter summary that basically says, you know, along the lines of those items which I mentioned, you know, these are the possibilities. This is what's in the current plan, official plan, and this is what I'm recommending, so that people have a synopsis of just, and don't have to, as I did, have to ferret out these things of what was mentioned and what wasn't. But if you're brave enough to call the Niagara Escarpment Commission or think about it, this matter of waltzing people through the possibility of you asking for a visual impact assessment, leading to the possibility of meeting with neighbors in the neighborhood, and then leading to the possibility of site plan controls, because it would be a horror show if you needed to do that with every building application. I mean, that's nutty. But to give you that tool would be something that would add to your arsenal, which I'm not sure the decrease in maximum height from 12.2 to 11 really accomplishes for you. So, Mr. Chair, those are my general comments.
Very good. Thank you, John. David, did you have any comments on that, or do you want to hear what I've got to say? And then
There are good comments. I am aware of the visual impact assessment policies in the NEP. It's actually maybe a good thought. We didn't really weigh in on the NEP because they have their own commission, and it's like, well, we don't want to, you know, we don't want to muddy the water with what they have prescribed in their good plan. So it was really at the time the sense it was off limits, although they do scrutinize such things through the development permit process.
They effectively handle the land use planning just as the municipalities do outside of the plan area. Right. So and hardly any of it gets to the commission because it's handled. as is your business, by land use planners, and only rarely gets to the commission or the council in this case.
I guess the only other possible tool is for council to put in a, well, first of all, I have to wonder if every area of Mono needs to be managed. I'm not sure about that. Rural area, that is. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. I think there's areas where I think there's greater sensitivity because of the nature of the landscapes. I'm thinking of areas along Mono Edge on the town line, and where anyway, many areas, that's one that comes to mind. I absolutely have no idea how, if you were to ask me, what if I had Frank Gehry do that silo and it won an award? Is that appropriate for Mono? And yet the architectural community saying this is a wonderful celebration of the past traditional architectural element known as the silo.
I follow you, but
you know what I mean?
That kind of architect wouldn't have any problem with doing a visual impact assessment, because that's
no,
their and
because
to have a conversation with neighbors is what architects do. So I'm to give you an example of one that was, it's 35, 40 years old now, is Mr. Boak's house, which, he's a great architect, and it's an outstanding house. And I mean, literally outstanding. And it raised eyebrows. Nobody complained about it because it's an absolutely stunning building. And, if you're not familiar with that part of rural Mono, you wouldn't possibly know where the glass pyramid is, but it's quite something. So we have had that, and so it hasn't raised, and Mrs. Boak was head of the Heritage Committee, so it kind of fit. So I don't think we need to presuppose that someone bringing forward a very large house is going to be turned down. I think some of it is to do with the fact that, you can take a 50-acre field and you can plunk in the middle of it something that it seems like it just got dropped out of, I don't know, Richmond Hill or Aurora or something. And it hasn't been through discussion and drawings and talk. It hasn't been fit into the neighborhood as well as it might have been. And so it raises issues. I mean, it'll only be a matter of years before the subdivisions in Mono are going to be facing the same thing, with the houses being torn down and monster houses being put in, because this is what's happening, all over the Greater Toronto area. And then you're going to have to deal with it for sure, because those neighborhoods are not going to want them, and until they indulge in them themselves. So it's I'm just thinking if there's a process that you may want to go through.
David, let me say a few things, please, and then you can comment afterwards. John, I think you make some very good points. I'm going to say something here that I don't think council want to hear. When this first came up and I heard about it, my first reaction was, do we really have a problem with this? Or are we waving it at windmills or whatever? Because to my best of my knowledge, there are at least one, if not only two of these homes. And the one that Jerry referred to, and I know it very well because it's at the second line and the fifth side road. I think that's the one that started this whole discussion. And the reason, as best I can figure out, that it became an issue was because it's kitty corner to an older house, which I think either was a schoolhouse or a municipal building or I don't know what. But if that house, the one at the southeast corner of the second and fifth, was in the middle of a 50-acre parcel, nobody would know anything about it. And that, so to the best of my knowledge, that's the only one. And I'm told that there's a second one. I don't know where it is. And that, so that's my first point, that I just wonder, do we actually have a problem here? Or are we, getting concerned that we're going to be overrun by these? David's first report, the July one, I thought was very good. He references Caledon and King, and anybody that drives south from here on Highway 10, you see those similar styled large homes on Highway 10, well back from the road. One of them on the west side burnt down some time ago, but it must have had a similar architect, and they have the same kind of style. The house is a mirrored image on either side. It's split down the middle in a mirrored image, and it's like the one there at the second and the fifth. So there's lots of them in Caledon, and you would have thought, and I talked with Dave this morning, and I thought, well, are there similar restrictive bylaws or things in Caledon or whatever? And the answer is no, there isn't. So I'm going to refer to his first report here, page 7 of 8, right at the top, where David makes a very good point that Mono's rural standard exceeds the recent similar provisions in King Township and Town of Caledon, with the exception of rear yard setbacks. And that's typically, so it appears as though we already have in place something very similar to similar rural style municipalities like Mono. So again, if we have this in place, then why do we need more? That's my question about the whole thing there. But let me go further with this, because I really just wonder whether it's government trying to control more than what they need to control. Again, I'm going to repeat it. That house at the second and the fifth, if it was in a different location, this issue probably never would have come up. And Jerry's right. Whatever their situation is there, they keep building it, and nobody's ever moved into it. And it's so. Perhaps, John, as you suggest, if there was a dialogue with the neighbor in the small old house on the northwest corner, that neighbor, I'm going to guess, would have objected to it anyhow. It doesn't matter. And as for the height, I don't think that building exceeds the maximum height. Dave, you may know or may not know, but I don't think it exceeds the maximum height anyhow. But where I'm really concerned, sorry, John?
It's not allowed to be the maximum height.
No. So we have again, from David's first report, our standards exceed similar areas. So with that, but where I'm really concerned, because what council is asking for is an official plan amendment, which is on the second report, starts at page 7, official plan amendment, but here's where I get concerned, the wording in this, and the purpose, which is page 8. Purpose: preserving the rural landscape, ensure new rural residential development is of an appropriate scale and intensity, keeping with the character of rural areas, minimizes negative impacts to the rural landscape. Well, I'm just not sure that the 1 or 2 large homes that we've got in the municipality destroy the rural landscape. But somebody, John, maybe it was you on page 9 there, talking about the general goals of the plan, preserving rural landscape, and that, well, there are certain areas of the town of Mono, and I live in one. I live in Island Lake subdivision, which is about 150 homes. Beside me is the Fieldstone, the Brookfield development, 350 homes. And we'll talk in the next point, point number 8 on our agenda. We'll talk about a couple of things, but at the bottom of page 9, add the following paragraphs. New development shall be of an appropriate scale and intensity. Well, one home on that lot at the 2nd and 5th, that shall not create negative impacts on the rural landscape character of the immediate area. Well, that location, that lot, was an empty field forever, so they put this home on it. But where I'm really concerned is on the next page, on page 10, if you've got this in front of you, and in about the middle of that page. And I've highlighted this, I've highlighted it, lots of yellow you can see here. Negative impacts. And this to me is something that should not be put into an official plan amendment. So because negative impacts, so here we go. Changes to the existing rural, natural, agricultural, forested, open, and human-altered landscape of the site and surrounding area that substantially and/or permanently alter that character due to the introduction of developments or built forms that dominate on the landscape, cause visual impacts that cannot be mitigated, and/or introduce prominent visual intrusions and whatever. And then below it, where it talks about rural landscape character. Why am I animated about this? Because if we say we're not going to allow that, then the house that I'm sitting in right now would never have been built. Because before Island Lake Estates was built, it was a field. No, it wasn't actively farmed. It was a field, and they built 150 homes on it. And the same thing for Fieldstone. It was a field for forever, and that. So according to this negative impacts paragraph here, which I'm suggesting should be completely thrown out, you do anything on a piece of rural land, and then it violates that negative impacts section there. So and we're we all know. There are areas, and somebody mentioned about certain areas that you don't need these kinds of controls on. There are areas, and when Fieldstone was being built beside me, to the chagrin of my neighbors here in the Island Lake Estate subdivision, I supported it, the 350 homes. And I made a few enemies, my neighbors. Why? Because they didn't want anything there. They just wanted the field that was there. And probably when Island Lake Estates was being built, the people who had lived on the first line of Mono would have screamed bloody murder because they were used to just an open field here on the west side of the first. So by putting this in, any kind of suggestion or proposal for residential development would be disallowed. And we know that that can't happen.
Bob, it would not be disallowed because it's the permissions for subdivision and urban expansion and all of that are completely in other parts of the official plan and the county plan. I strongly disagree with you, Bob. I feel like I'm losing, excuse me, the thread on the original goal here. My understanding was the mayor and the elected council ran and had in their platforms at the last election that they were going to bring in something to address the matter of oversized homes. And so my reading is that this is unfinished business of council. There are some strong feelings that they want to bring in something. So my concern is bring in something that is reasonable and works. I do not want to reply or send back to council what your message is, which is you're misguided and you shouldn't be doing this at all. I think
No,
that's not appropriate for our committee to be suggesting to them. If they want to bring in something, they've asked Dave to prepare something, to revise it, and Dave's worked on this, and they want to bring this to some sort of conclusion, and if necessary, some public discussion at a public meeting, which I think is where these matters of should this be done at all can come up and come to the fore. But my role at this particular point, I take it, is to try and give Dave advice on how this might be made more effective so that it achieves what is being asked. And
John, I agree with you completely. If I've stated something and I haven't been clear about my feelings, I actually support very much what David has prepared here. I've got to but to put in something like this, because we will get development, we will get more residential building. And there are two that are on the website as active planning applications, and that we'll talk about that in the next point. But I support, I mean, complete support of doing this, but doing it right, but not you know. I'm just sort of that paragraph on page 10 there. And John, I've got to confess something. And I ran in the last election, and I sat in all of the public meetings. And I gotta tell you, and I have all of the literature from all of the other people that ran. I don't recall any of them running on a platform of controlling monster homes. So I missed something. Now, I didn't get elected, so maybe I missed a lot of things. So, but I'm fine with putting in the right controls, the right regulations, which again, according to page 7 of Dave's first report, apparently we already have.
well, on that point, Bob, I direct yourself. I mean, that's what it says. The rural standard exceeds the recent similar provisions of King and Town of Mono. But if you look at the actual data on page 6, that's not the case. So Mono's does not, with regard to height or maximum building area. There's at least 4 of these items that are covered by other municipalities where Dave has put into the column not applicable, NA. Well, what do you mean it's not applicable? It could be applicable. It's just that Mono's OP doesn't address it. So it's erroneous to put in N/A because it implies that somehow we're different from those municipalities. So if you actually look through this, you'll see that there are differences and there are possibilities of improvements and adjustments along these same lines. So I don't accept that concluding remark on page 7 when I look at the actual figures that are presented on page 6.
And I agree with you, John. So perhaps one comment that this committee should be making is that if it's good enough for King and it's good enough for Caledon, then maybe we need to fill in those non-applicables. And
I would add to it, if it's good enough for the Niagara Escarpment plan area, then why don't we look at that? I mean,
good idea.
There's much of Mono that, except for errors in geological maps, would be in the Niagara Escarpment plan area. They're just as scenic. And at any rate, I've said enough. I'll cease and desist. I think it's a very interesting topic, and whether or not we can take the time, or somebody can take the time to write up some remarks and some advice that's arising from this discussion and give us the opportunity to circulate it amongst ourselves to see whether or not it captures the advice we want to provide. But I just can't quite see myself at this particular point biting on a a recommendation of our committee that just says, oh, this is fine, go ahead. I mean, that's it.
Dave.
That's your prerogative.
Did I just have,
Dave, can I ask you a question? Would you,
Yeah.
if somebody came to you with whatever kind of a size of a lot, a 3-acre lot, and said, I want to build a 10,000 square foot house and it's going to be 15 meters. Do you even see that till after it's all approved? Because the county really does the building permits, etc. So do you see it till afterwards, or how does that work?
Yeah, what happens is on a smaller rural lot, as with any lot, before it gets a permit issued by Dufferin County Building, we have to do zoning compliance. So it must meet lot coverage, it must meet setbacks, there is a height. Now, I didn't put in the specific rural A zone height. To your point, John, well taken. There is a general height under a blanket height of 12 meters for any structure in the rural area under the general provisions. But I got your point. Those are three matters that maybe we could fill in some numbers. But no, to your point, Jerry, we would look at that and see what the setbacks are, the lot coverage and the height.
Okay, so what about 100 acres? Do you see them all before they're built?
Yes,
off
yes.
A building permit?
Anything requiring a building permit, we get to kick at the can under city for zoning compliance. The one thing I do, which really it doesn't have any guidance in our OP. I don't think we have any one provision in our OP. If someone's coming in and says, I've just moved up from Toronto, we'll pick on Torontonians, why not? I bought a 100-acre lot and I'm going to put a nice house on it. I will do my utmost to ensure that the location of that house, God forbid, isn't in the middle of 100 acres. You know, I make my point out of exaggeration. In other words, I would say to that owner, well, like, wait a minute, I got to think long-term here. And I would like to see that house on a corner so that the majority of the arable lands are kept intact well beyond my lifetime and yours, Mr. New Homeowner. And that usually wins the light of day. People see the common sense of that. So that's one thing I've done. I've heard what you said, Bob. You've made some interesting points. Now, interestingly, as a suburban community, you do have architectural control, which was put over that subdivision, which is why, in my view, it looks so darn good and beautiful. I mean, I know there, anyway, there are things that can be done and cannot be done almost in the form of a condominium. I lived in a condominium in Barrie, and I tried putting in, I was a starving greenhorn planter of the days. All I could afford was a window air conditioner. Remember when summer was damn hot, I was told, get that damn thing out of there. All you're allowed is central air. And I had to move it. I got a letter, take it out, suffer the heat or put in a central air conditioner. So condominium prescriptions provide that kind of detail, but that's an urban prescription. I think listening to the conversation, I do believe this is going to come back to committee another time. I think it has to, because I said at the outset, none of this is rocket science, but it's kind of tricky. And I think there's been a lot of good comments made. One is, how do you regulate art that's in art or buildable form that's in the eye of the beholder? And yet, John made an interesting point about visual impact assessment. I think that's probably a tool that can be applied. I think the question is, should it be targeted in certain rural areas, or is it blanket across the rural area? Because I don't know if 5 out of 10 rural citizens in Mono would say, well, Dave, of all the areas in rural Mono, look at this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, or these roadscapes, this one, this one, this one, these ones, for whatever reason, have distinct character. Focus on those first, or would all 10 say, Dave, anywhere in the rural area? So that's one question.
I think, I might just comment on that, Dave. I think rather than targeting particular areas, I would like you to think of maybe a statistical or a calculation that you might be able to apply that just that gives you the option of requesting a visual impact assessment, so that it's your tool to be applied. So if someone brings in something that's 12 meters or, I don't know, like over 10,000 square feet or something like that, you have the option, like framed that way rather than targeting particular geographic areas.
Okay. I think the other thing too is we need to know where our limits lie.
Right.
Because in the rural area, if I'm not mistaken, if I win the lottery tomorrow and absolutely buy a beautiful 100-acre property in Mono, which I would love to do, and it has with a split rail fence around a portion of the property, and for whatever bizarre reason, I decide the next week to paint that beautiful split rail fence fluorescent orange, who could stop me? Not that I would do that, by the way, but to make my point, who could stop me from doing that? Who could stop me from putting a fluorescent orange new roof on my barn?
But you haven't been tasked by council to deal with fluorescent cedar rail fences. It's the problem
No.
is the longer term one, that once you build, and I have lots of cedar rail fences, and they take a lot of work to keep them up above ground. So, but a house that you invest in that's 10,000 square feet, that's going to be around for a long time. So.
Fine, but what's to stop you from if you need a new roof next year, John, what's to stop you from waking up one day and telling the roofer, I want fluorescent green metal roof? Or
Right.
I want to upstage that good architect, Mr. Boak, and put in a mirrored surface.
But that's
roof.
not the task that has been given. The task has been the size of homes built, structures that seem to some to be disproportionate to their rural neighborhoods. So
okay,
I think if we get distracted too much out on roofs and paint jobs, we got to get back to what the concern is, and the concern is, and I'll just tell you that it's faced in the Niagara Escarpment Commission regularly, and that is that an individual ego, let me put it bluntly, that wants to build a 50,000 square foot house and has the wherewithal to force it on the landscape is almost certainly never going to find another similar ego that's going to buy it when they're finished with it, and their kids aren't going to use it. So there's a community interest in keeping homes in a kind of neighborly context so that they stay well used and well occupied. I mean, some of these huge monster houses along the Niagara Escarpment Coast have been abandoned. Like they're like Tuscany ruins looking for tourists. I mean, it's bizarre.
That's a good point.
Fair enough.
I think, we've got a lot of good points have been made here. I didn't know and really, frankly, didn't expect that as we typically do, that we come up with a specific recommendation for council. If anybody has any ideas about specific recommendations, I'd love to hear them, but I think Dave's on the right track here. And if you fill in some of the non-applicables with on this chart on page 6, and if in fact our regulations the standards already exceed similar rural municipalities, then I think we're already on the right track. And
so how about, I think as you and I spoke, Chair McCrae, that maybe this would come back to committee. I think we've had a pretty good fulsome dialogue, by the way, tonight. And I think maybe based on some of the comments that are made, I've got the notes. Maybe there's some blank spots here that need to be considered. There's a question of a visual impact. There's a question that you've indicated, Bob, about just how far reaching should these not be? I use that word distinctly, not be, and that they be reasonable. And it'll be another report to committee. And I suppose I could, with tongue in cheek, call it, a man's home is his castle. And that could be the title of the next report. And then we'll see what comes out in terms of comments on a bit more provision in the zoning and in the chart, and I can see what I can do for a prescription for visual impact assessment. I think those were the two things, right? There was a chart provisions, or 3 of them, and a visual impact assessment based on a calculation. I'll stop short of calling it an algorithm, but something of that sort that would prompt me or staff to trigger that scrutiny. I guess what we're not talking about tonight, though, I mean, that's a good point you made, John, about this is about massing. That's right. I got off on a tangent on style, because I think that has as much of a, that will create as much of a concern at times, but there's really nothing, you know, as you say, Mr. Boak's glass pyramid is there, and it's a very unique design. But that's not what this is about. It's about size, especially relative to setback, streetscape, and lot area. That's what council's asked us to look at anyway, not whether your strip rail fences become fluorescent orange a week from now or not, even though they could. But sure, I think that's what we can focus on.
If I could leave you with the last example I remember from the Niagara Escarpment Commission, a recent divorcee who'd got a divorce settlement of $300 million, bought about 20 acres in the Ancaster Valley, and just had never been there before. Somebody said, "Oh, that's a good place, that's a good property," and then she just hired some architects and they designed something, and it got to the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and she was quite taken aback that land use planning actually occurred in Ontario at all. She just had no familiarity with it whatsoever. So I remember her coming to the commission, and when she heard people talking about the visual impact assessment that had been done, she said, "Oh, we could do that so that people see what it looks like, because it appeals to my vanity. I can see what it looks like." And then the discussion was made, well, you know, have a talk with your neighbors. And of course, she never met any of her neighbors, didn't know who was in the neighborhood or what their concerns might be. And really, they didn't travel in the same social circles. And so by the time it came back to the commission, she had voluntarily fit it better to her neighborhood. And everything went smoothly as a result. It's not always going to happen like that, but I can cite several examples around Bell Fountain, you know, the Eaton property and that kind of thing, where the same thing happened because the process was slightly protracted. There was an assessment, there were discussions, there were meeting the neighbors, dealing with concerns. So by the time it got to municipal decision making, a lot of the edges have been worn off. And that's I think that's good planning.
I think you're right, John. David? So I'm wondering, I don't think we are going to make a specific recommendation to council here. Can we summarize this, that the committee had discussions, members gave input to the director of planning, and he is going to fine tune what he has already done to make a recommendation to council. Does that make sense? Does that sound right?
Yeah, and may I add that because Susan has recorded us so diligently, you know, maybe she could pick off you know, a list of thoughts that we've had in passing, and pass those on to David as sort of a check-off thing, and maybe pass it along to us as well in case there were any that we thought deserved rewording or augmenting or whatever. So
Okay,
I appreciate Ash and Dave and Bob, especially your suburban perspective. It's always greatly appreciated.
Well, and John, that's we're now Mono is getting a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. That's why I've always recommended to Mono Council that on any of our committees that we need to have people with different experiences and living in different areas. We've got members on our committee here that live in rural areas. Jerry lives on his farm. And I'm the only one that lives in a subdivision, and that brings a different perspective to it. I guess that's why I keyed in on the item here that, you know, where the negative impacts that, you know, if you put anything in a rural field, a rural field in Mono, then you have changed the existing rural natural agricultural. So if you do anything, you've changed it. And we know that that can't happen. And that's why, you know, I keyed in on that because, and we're about to, I think we've talked about this enough with everybody's permission, but, you know, when we move on to the active planning applications, we're going to see that there are a couple of items in pre-consultation with homes and that, and, you know, to say you can't change the existing rural natural, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it would exclude that. And as I argued when Brookfield was proposing the Fieldstone subdivision, my argument was pretty straightforward. That is the ideal location, other than the one that I already live in. That is one of the ideal locations in Mono to put 350 homes. So, you know, what I'm saying is that there are locations in Mono where you know, development is an okay thing. So does that, anybody else have anything else to say? Susan is very good at recording this. David?
Well, just one last thing is that in my last report to council, I did say that this matter goes to your committee for review and for an options and directions report for recommendation to council. So it doesn't say it must come immediately back to council. I will do this options and directions report. We can label it that, which is basically another further review of the two amendments, which I said at the beginning, our first draft, and include the cited matters cited by committee for addressing. And we'll bring it back to another planning committee meeting. And we'll call it that, an options and directions report, at which time maybe we can achieve and fulfill a substantive recommendation to council, which is probably going to be the options and directions summary and the two amendments that will be attached to it. I think the policy side things have been well discussed here, and you know, there's the language got to be careful, but it's easier to do because it's policy. We'll fill in the blanks on the column, but I think we also need to be mindful that we don't trigger a multitude of minor variances. So again, as I said at the beginning, not rocket science, but tricky on the zoning amendment side, because we got to be careful we don't capture people unwittingly because of those prescriptions that we might put in. So it'll require a bit more scrutiny, but and let me say this much too, you know, as I'm reflecting here and chatting away, we're supposed to be doing a zoning bylaw update, and it could be that maybe anything we put as a zoning prescription should be left for that. I'll leave it, doesn't have to. There is a draft amendment for zoning amendment, but it may be at the end of the day that's something that we wrap into a zoning bylaw update. And there's a number of matters that need to be updated in that bylaw. I think one of the big white elephants in the room, and I have no idea where it will go at this point, is whether or not we prescribe a split in rural versus agricultural zoning relative to our designations. Who knows? I mean, I do not know. I say that as who knows. And that may help to assist on what prescriptions are for bona fide agricultural versus rural. There's some tricky bits with that as well. I won't get into them, but you know, where do you draw the line between bona fide farmer and not? Anyway, enough to say that if we bring back another report and call it an options direction report per that recommendation resolution in council for the December 14th meeting, we can include some of these matters and we can have another kick at the can in front of committee and see what comes out the other side.
I think that's a great idea. Other committee members, are we in agreement with that approach?
Yes.
Jerry, I can't see you.
Yeah, yes, we
You're
are.
okay? That's excellent. I think that's great. I think it really it does help to move this forward. And I know that John Creelman was anxious for our committee to see this and that. So I think we've given some good input there. So thank you everybody for that. Let's move along. Number 8 on our agenda, active planning applications. We talked about this, and I've asked for this to be put on as a standard item on our planning and our planning committee agenda here. We have it. If you've looked on the website, there is one of the tabs there. You click on it, and you get a long list of active planning applications. And I think it's very good. Anybody can see what's going on there. There are a couple on there that are in the pre-consultation stage, which is very preliminary. But every time one of those goes on there, I get a phone call, and the one that we talked about previously, which is the property on Highway 10 north of Royal Chev Olds to the east of Watermark. That's pre-consultation, and that's that's the 223-story townhomes, very preliminary. The new one that is on there, if you haven't seen it, is right next door to me here, the Hand property on the second line, and it's second line, west side of the second line, right across from the Dufferin Glen golf course, just north of the Coles subdivision. That is on there. It is pre-consultation phase, which is very, 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 very preliminary. We may see it someday, who knows, but it's there just so that you're aware of it. The initial application is for 400 homes on 40-foot lots. So I want you to be aware of that. It's there. If anybody phones you up and says, John, what's this about 400 homes on 40-foot lots on the second? You're aware of that. David and I have talked about this, and we're trying to put those in a different section on there so that people realize pre-consultation is just the start. It's not active. David, you had your finger up, so.
Sure, just to add a bit of clarity to that, if I may. It's not top secret. It is on our webpage. We did get a request to initiate a pre-consultation, and what that means is pre-application review. And what that is if, as the proponent or the applicant, I want to go forward with this, I use this phrase a lot, what basket of reports, plans, and documents do the pertinent agencies that will be reviewing my applications need to see? What is their Christmas list? I'll characterize it that way. What is their wish list? I need, and they will then get back a list of these, call again, a basket of documents, reports, plans, and diagrams that each and all agencies, departments collectively want to see prepared for review. Now, before that happens, because the Hands parcel is considered, it has been for some time, I'll use a term loosely, a phase 2 to the Coles French Drive Industrial Park. That's been the position of most councils and monos, as far as I know. Certainly that there's been an understanding that that's what those lines will be for. There's a prescription in the OP that speaks to that, although the term is may rather than shall. And I'll speak to that just briefly in a moment. And so as a result, we've required the interested developer, because I don't know if they own the lands yet, to undergo an employment conversion study. And what that means is they have to demonstrate that the conversion of those lands from employment, industrial, light industrial, to residential is justified, and probably will undergo a peer review. Have to undergo peer review. However good that conversion study is, I think that's, and I've told the applicant that, I said the optics will simply require that no matter how good your study may be, it will still have to go a peer review. Otherwise, somebody could, in front of committee, waggle their finger at me and say, did it go peer review? And I say, no, I don't think it needed to. So wrong answer, it will be peer reviewed. I'm pretty sure that. And the same thing with the Aragon parcel on Highway 10 between Kingfisher and 10 north of Monara Park. It has to undergo an employment conversion study. So they've got to meet that test first. That test has to be met. And if and only if it can be met, then they can consider bringing in applications under the Planning Act for redesignation and implementing zoning bylaw with the plan of subdivision, I suppose, if that's what it's going to be, for housing. There's another aspect to all of this, and that is vehicles don't drive or fly unless they've got a full tank of gas. And I say that phrase matter-of-factly because there's a whole aspect of servicing here. And regardless of what the land use designation becomes, it has to be serviced. So there will likely be a need for environmental class assessment, as well as a master servicing exercise. And so, you know, those are significant things that would need to be done to provide support for whatever land use designation goes forward on the Hands parcel anyway, and the Aragon one as well.
Yeah. Barbara?
So they are pre-consultations.
Yeah.
It's
Barbara?
not a foregone conclusion that they will be houses, let alone 400. But that's their vision at this point.
I'm sure you're aware that Mono has a Facebook group. And that,
I've heard that. Yeah.
yes, and that topic has been discussed on the group site, just so
Yeah.
that you know that. One of the things I've been dying to ask you is when you receive these preliminary requests for rezoning, is there any consideration into soft services? I see all kinds of requests for hard surface, road impact, environmental impact, but on the soft service side, 400 houses would probably, let's say maybe 1.5 children. So we're looking at approximately maybe 250 more children. Where are these kids going to go to school? Right now, Island Lake is overcrowded. They're busing kids all over the place. The hospital, the medical facilities in Orangeville and in Mono are overutilized. Do we not have, well, even something as simple as an education development fee incorporated into these proposals? I'm probably going ahead of myself because this is, as you say, is in preliminary phase, but I'm somewhat concerned about the amount of development that's going in without the soft services to be able to provide to these future residents.
Developments are subject to DCA, Development Charges Act fees, and there are many things monetarily and otherwise that are captured in conditions of draft approval of a draft plan of subdivision, if it gets that far. So we can talk more generally. We don't have to talk about the Hands land, any plan of subdivision. And these things are, keep in mind, these plans of subdivision are supposed to, the vast majority of growth is to go to existing settlements on full municipal services. So it remains to see whether 400 houses or less, never mind maybe more, will go on that site. But regardless, Under the plan of subdivision legislation, there will be an array of conditions that speak to both hard services and soft services, and there'll be DCA fees in the plan of subdivision. It gets to the point of draft approval and then final approval that are applied accordingly. So yeah, that is the mechanism by which those matters are addressed, or at least one of them anyway. It's a key one. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, they have to, and by the way, something of that scale, wherever it might be, would get circulated to all the school boards, who then can weigh on whether they need a new school, need land for a new school, or part of the DCA monies to do so down the road, including, as you say, libraries and so on and so forth. And we could argue all night whether the amount's big enough or substantial enough from one service to another, but they are covered through that process.
Very good. John, you had your hand up?
Dave and Bob and Terry, Barb, this is sort of building on Barbara's comments a little bit. And I don't know if this already exists. I'm just not aware of it, David, but Queen's Park has on retainer a company called PENHC Consulting. And they're the ones which, you know, about every 6 months they come out with their new estimates. And these are all estimates of, you know, agreed upon by the province and the feds of how to accommodate 4.5 million more people into the Greater Golden Horseshoe in the next 25 years. And it's all laid out in a very artful way. There's only 3 variables. It's number of jobs, number of people, and number of houses. And those are the 3 numbers that are tracked. And then what PENHC does on that basis is they divvy it up amongst all the municipalities. And then Queen's Park does the dirty work, and they send out, I guess on a 6-month basis, the new requirements of municipalities to bring the overall population growth figures, hence the development growth figures, into compliance with the new PENHC Consulting / Queen's Park requirements. And so this happens as a regular part of land use planning and municipal, you know, corporate planning on an ongoing basis. And many municipalities, you know, every couple of years, they take a breath and they say, what's the latest requirement for us to grow? Because Queen's Park is pushing out the requirements to grow all the time. It doesn't matter what political party it is. It's just a matter of difference in numbers. And then that influences, you know, lands that's brought in for subdivisions or not. So these are 2 large subdivisions, which, as pointed out, may need servicing and that kind of thing. And other soft services as well, as Barbara spoke to. So do we have a sort of a capsule summary of what the latest provincial requirements are for Dufferin County, and then of Mono within Dufferin County for growth, and where are we at with regard to meeting those Queen's Park requirements, and you know, and just sort of laid there as kind of setting the stage for these development applications. You know, there are a few municipalities like Halton Hills, Hamilton recently, have turned around to the province and they've just said, time out. We don't buy into this model anymore because it really requires suburban sprawl. And the Hamilton, for example, is saying, no, we would like to push that development back into already serviced areas and see what we can do about that. So anyway, there's different municipal responses, but not all of them at this point are totally compliant. So it's again, it's that, what's that big picture that we're getting force fed by Queen's Park that drives
there's 2 aspects.
About, you know, a 400 lot development on 40-foot lots.
The first one that you've alluded to, I believe, is for urban municipalities that have defined built boundaries, and particularly larger towns and cities that have been prescribed through previous reviews under the growth plan, greenfield density targets, and intensification targets within the built boundary. So the first growth plan, in order to make it go forward, it had to define an imaginary built boundary in any one urban town or city. And it was within those areas because things were going to continue to build. So they had to define, that was a line in the sand that was drawn, and those built lands within the built boundary going forward had to demonstrate over time that they were densifying, that they were meeting the growth plan overarching principles of go up, not out. And those frequent tests, I think, from Hempson are what you're alluding to, where those with transit hubs and growth nodes and significant employment lands, the bigger town cities on full capacity services, I believe have to demonstrate periodically through Hempson, I guess it is. I'm not sure I didn't know that, but through Hempson, how they're meeting their targets or how they're trying to achieve those targets. And they'll continue to do so going forward. The second part of what you're speaking to is on a more regional basis.
So that it doesn't, those targets don't apply to Mono, for the town of Mono, for example.
No,
but
Mono does not have a built boundary. Mono is a rural municipality with predominantly private services, save and except for Fieldstone. What am I missing? There's a few more. I think there's one or two more. I can't remember. Oh, Watermark.
Watermark.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think those are the only two. And they're by no means, municipal sewage plants. They're a higher level of servicing beyond a private well and a septic bed, but they're not the likes of what Barrie has on Kempfeld Bay. Just to pick on Barrie for the moment. Mono is a rural municipality, and so it does not have a built.
There is not a requirement for growth.
No, that is not. No, that density intensification is not a requirement for Mono because it's a rural municipality. It doesn't have full services, municipal services, and so it doesn't have to meet those density targets in the growth plan because it's not urban. But we have community settlements. We have hamlets, otherwise called a hamlet. We have, Purple Hill and Cardinal Woods and the others. And those may, based on these periodic growth plan review targets, be allowed to have expansion, area expansion, become geographically bigger, because the infilling is really, or the densification is really on an infill basis. In other words, you can't start looking at Camille and saying, well, we're going to wipe out half the homes and put in 3-story apartment walk-ups. Not that that's not a good idea, but not there. So that's really the limit of growth. Pardon me?
That's very interesting, David. So that clears out of my mind this idea that I've had that Mono is being driven by Queen's Park to build large new subdivisions. Now,
well,
they
definitely want more housing. Let me just finish up by saying this because I know Bob wants to say something here. There is.
Hold it, John, finish, please.
So my point is that I think gives Mono some additional latitude to try and address some of the things that Barbara raised on soft services. In other words, when someone comes in and says they would like to have 400 houses on 40-foot lots, then can we not ask for a full cost-benefit analysis? Like, what are the full municipal costs that are going to be?
I've seen that as a condition before.
And
I've seen the cost-benefit analysis as a condition. Financial impact study, for sure.
Yeah, for the municipality, because as Barbara points out, they mount up, and they're going to mount up in the future when people aren't going to be able to drive and they can't get to their jobs and have to have local employment and transit and all that. So.
Can I make this suggestion, please? Because I think our meeting, we've done what we really needed to do, and it's getting later. Can I make this suggestion? A few months ago, there was some kind of report that was given to Dufferin County. David, you know what I'm talking about. And there were numbers that were put out there that each municipality, and it included Mono, and it got one of our council members very upset because I think that the number, David, correct me if I'm wrong, was that Mono over the next 20 years was going to have to add an additional 2,200 people. And I don't want to get into that, but that came up at this report that was given to Dufferin County, and the one council member got all upset about this and said, are we going to have to rezone things? Are we going to have to do this? Are we going to have to do that? To which I facetiously suggested that we have about 3,300 properties in Mono. If we only need to add 2,200 people over the next 20 years, then if 2/3 of the 3,300 properties just takes in one more person, then we've met whatever that goal is. Obviously, I was being facetious, but the point is there are different ways of achieving this sort of thing. But David, can I ask this, because I think we should conclude this meeting. Let's put this on the agenda for the next meeting. You know the report that I'm talking about. I don't know the report. I wasn't involved in that meeting, but let's put that on about future growth requirements in Mono as an item. Jerry?
I can do that. I can do that, Bob, but just bear in mind, there's a timing factor here. And what I mean by that is the first draft land needs assessment was released last week from Dufferin County. It got a lot of reaction, not all of it good. And I prepared a report that went to the February 8th council meeting. I'm going to have to do a follow-up report because there was a number of questions about that land needs study. We had a meeting today with Dufferin County and their consultant, and there will be a letter from Mark going to council, I believe, as a follow-up. And I'm going to have to come back with that report, that follow-up report. It was going to be initially on next council, but we don't have enough clarity yet from the consultant to give council a more material, meaningful follow-up report. So that's going to go down in a forthcoming council meeting. And when that happens, then of course I can advise committee accordingly as to what that outcome was, for sure.
So let's defer that to another meeting. Jerry, you had your hand.
It won't be the next one, I don't think. It will be
it's
the
okay.
next available planning committee meeting.
Yeah, no problem. Jerry?
No, I was just going to say the last report I saw was the Ontario Growth Plan, and it certainly designated a certain number of people, and I can't tell you the numbers, to Shelburne and Grand Valley, and that satisfied a lot of Dufferin's needs for the next few years, and I think that's certainly gone there at this point in time.
Let me just summarize. That's a good point. So there's three things going on here. There is a review of the Dufferin County official plan, a component of which is the land needs analysis for each of the lower tiers. There is the growth plan that Jerry has alluded to. And the third thing is, we'll have to do a conformity exercise down the road as well. But those are three key things that are ongoing right now. So I hope that helps to give you some clarity.
Okay. Yep, Jerry?
Yeah, one thing I think this committee should know, and I sound like I'm harping on it, Dufferin County has put 9.3 acres of land every day out of agricultural land out of service since the last census in 2016. And I think we better be aware of what we're doing. And I guess in conjunction with that, I have written a letter to both the Premier and our local MPP about the 413 highway, because that's something that's going to come and bite us right on the tail. If you build it, they're going to be here. and that's going to use up 4,000 acres of agricultural land too. And people think the shelves are empty now, but I think a planning committee better realize what the hell's happening. And Mona isn't a big part of growing food, but that's just too many acres to take out of production to just let go. And as a comparison, Wellington Waterloo only take 5 acres a day out of production. So they're a lot bigger than we are. So you just kind of look at that, and I don't blame Mona for any of that, but it's certainly something that the county should be aware of, I think.
There's one more thing I should add, and that is, of course, the recently released Provincial Task Force on Housing Affordability. And that has got nothing, well, I don't know if anyone gave it accolades. It was a very one-sided report. It's a developer proponent-led report. It didn't speak much at all to affordability. Mark wrote a letter to the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs. It's a pretty blunt report. And it did get some dialogue as well today at the Dufferin County Planners Review meeting. Just as a last point to your comment, Jerry, my understanding is that Waterloo region has exceeded growth plan targets. I don't know how they've done it in every nuance, but they are ahead of the curve in terms of meeting growth plan conformity. So who knows why or how, but they are. And if that's part of the result is that they are absorbing less agricultural land because of growth needs, then that's probably I won't call it desirable, but a more acceptable outcome.
Yeah, no,
and the thing I said today, we had comments today, just to wrap up here. Part of the comment, there was a lot of commentary. The CEOs were online to the meeting as well today, and a lot of good commentary. But again, the province needs to look long-term, past partisanship, and think of really good, creative, how in the long term are we going to make our communities better? How do we get back to town and country planning? Well, let's call it city, town, and country planning, and make some good long-term, meaningful, effective, healthy, and creative solutions. And it really, you speak to Highway 14. My view, MTO should be looking well beyond 50 years. I mean, ultimately, we'll need a highway somewhere. Well, let's make sure it's in the right spot. And let's make sure it is built for long-term multimodal functionality. It's the same with streets and cities. They do not have that. Where do kids growing up on the 10th story of a condo building, however big and palatial it might be, because both parents work on Bay Street, where do they play? Where on Yonge Street do they play? There is no, and it's not going to change overnight. It will require huge structural urban design changes to those corridors to make them more healthy and pedestrian and people friendly. So
David, you make a good point there, but again, the evening is getting along. But we should table that, and you and I can talk about it. We'll put it. It's a good discussion, and that for a future meeting. So
okay.
If it's okay with everybody, again, check out the active planning application. So John, some of those are our committee of adjustment items. We've got a meeting a week from today on that. So moving along, in other business, anybody have any other business? All great discussions, and as you know, I have a degree in urban planning, so I'm fascinated by this. So anyhow, we'll see. Any other business? The only other business I had, David, next meeting, do we have anything in the pipeline for that would require a meeting in March?
If I'm able to bring an update to you on the pre-consultation on those 2 parcels forward, if I'm allowed, let me paraphrase it that way, then I can do so. Those are the excuse me, the only 2 that come to mind right now.
Okay, that would be it. So, and I'll send out an email then. So everybody keep the third Thursday, which is March 17. I'll send an email on this. Keep that on your planner, and I'll keep in touch with David and we'll confirm whether we've got something there to for a meeting on that, if that's okay with everybody.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can you hear me? And to follow up on what we discussed tonight, would that come back in March, David, or later?
What, the 2 pre-consultation applications or
No,
submissions?
No.
The monster homes thing. But
Yeah.
it's dependent on how fast the council deals with it. Susan, I think the answer to that
I'll try.
is we don't know.
I'll try. It's not a month away, so I'll do my best. It seems like a month away, but it's not. So I'll check in with you, Bob, to see where I am on it. And I'd ask the graciousness of the extra time if need be. We'll have a push into April, I guess, but I'll see if I can bring something back for March. I'll do my best.
Yep. Yeah, you're busy with a lot of things. So again, I'll send out an email asking everybody to block out the 17th of March. So with that, anything else? Anybody?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you. A seconder. Barbara, Jerry, Annette. With that, I just want to thank Susan. Thank you for all your good work. David, thank you for all your good work. And to keep fighting the good fight. And we may see you in March. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, committee members. Good meeting. Lots of good thoughts, and I hope that it helps move the process forward. Thank you, everybody. Keep well. Enjoy the snow.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye now.